myths that I want to address first before we get into looking at some questions and then looking at some activities, and then looking at what I think is what I know is my favorite way to approach these. So some myths. The myths that they're all written by testing people. We also have the myth that a computer just spits out these questions and they come to my students. I'm going to address all of these in just a moment. I just want to lay them out there. There are questions or answers meant to trick students. Right? It may feel that way, but that's not necessarily the case. All of the questions are supposed to be the same level of difficulty, college level, whatever that means. And then finally here for this set of myths, students have to know a bunch of literary or rhetorical terms because they could be answers. All right, so with some of these, there are some revisions that have happened since the articulation of the course in 2020. I was honored to get to be the lead author on that and guide that work, and for both the language and the literature course. And the committee made up of college professors and high school teachers did just wonderful work with all of that. But some of these things have always been true too. So let's talk about some of these realities with it. Okay, they are written by professors, AP teachers, and ETS and College Board experts in the field. So it's not a testing person sitting around just writing these questions. These are experts who know English literature, who know composition and rhetoric. Right, even the people who are working at College Board and ETS have PhDs in English. And in most cases, when I was there, I had been a teacher and I was doing it. The people I know who have come in there since are former classroom teachers, so they know the course, they know teaching. And so I think that's really important for everyone to know there. Because of number two as well. The computer doesn't just spit these out. All right, all of these questions are field tested. When I say field tested, I mean they put together sets of these questions and they send them to college professors who have agreed to let their first semester or first year composition or literature course, depending on the course, have agreed to let them take these, and they see how those students do, because those are the students to whom the AP students are being compared. And so they get all that data back and they use that data to make decisions about the questions. Now, I'm not going to get all into the ed statistics and things like that, but I will say this. In general, if there's ever a question where more students choose an incorrect answer than the correct answer, that question gets thrown out. Also, questions where they may choose an incorrect answer as often as the correct answer, those are scrutinized really closely. And sometimes they're retested. And the whole point is to make sure that the questions are actually testing what they're supposed to be testing, and they're actually helping to draw a line between a high performing, middle performing, average performing, and a lower performing or struggling student. Right, that's really important to keep in mind, because there's lots of questions that are written that don't make it on because they don't field test well. All of these questions are evaluated for difficulty and appropriateness, like I just talked about. And those trick questions are eliminated. I've never heard in the 5 years, 6 years I was there, I never once heard anybody from College Board or ETS or anybody in the committee say, hey, we need to make this question a little trickier. Never once heard it. Right. And I promise you, and the kids may not believe it, but I promise you that's the case. Number 4 here. This idea, I often hear that people say, well, all of these questions are college level questions. Well, if you just look at them, you can tell they aren't. But these questions really do represent 3 large categories of performance. And the reason is if they were all the same difficulty, you'd have a whole lot of kids who didn't get any of them right. You'd have a whole lot of kids who got all of them right, and there'd be nothing really in the middle. So they have to split the difference. And when they field test and they get all that data back, that's how we learn about what questions are higher performing questions, what questions are lower difficulty questions. And they try to do a balance across the entire exam with those questions. And they try to make that, I don't want to say they try, they do. They make those numbers and that balance the same year to year. so that the performances from last year can be compared to this year in a way. And that's another reason why we don't get multiple choice questions released from exams every year. And they've started releasing the older ones now that do get released are being released on AP Classroom. But you're not going to get them every year because because questions your kids take this year, some of those questions were used a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, right? And some of those questions from this year will be used again in 2, 3, 4 years so that they can compare performance across time. Because when you change the passages and you change the questions constantly, it's hard to compare performance. And that's one of the things that I was really impressed that College Board's always doing is comparing and making sure that the exam is still reliable and valid. All right. And then finally, I cannot emphasize this enough. One of the main reasons that we revised and articulated the courses like we did in the binders or in the big PDFs, whichever ones you have, is so that there was no longer this guessing game about what rhetorical terms and literary terms kids needed to know. If it is in the essential knowledge in the course and exam descriptions, kids need to know it. It is game to be on the multiple choice. But if it is not in that description, if it is not in the essential knowledge, kids do not have to know it. It will not appear on the exam in the multiple choice like that. Right. Now, if something did appear, for instance, if they had a question about, if they had a prompt, an essay prompt talking about irony, they're probably going to, I'm going to say, when I say probably, I mean almost undoubtedly they're going to define irony so that everybody is on the same page. Even though it's in the course, they're going to make sure it's defined because there's no gotchas here. And we all understand that people would approach things in different ways. So if it's in the course and exam description, it's game. Right, and one of the things we do in my AP Summer Institutes is we go through and check on those. We go through and look at all those terms. So we say, hey, are we teaching these? Are we using these terms? How are we using these terms? Are we using something that looks like them? Stuff like that. So live in that course and exam description. And I know a lot of you are. All right, so my advice for multiple choice questions before we start getting into actually playing with some and nerding out a little bit with them. Okay, for the reading questions. All right, read the question. I want you reading questions first, and we're going to practice that in a moment. You'll see what I'm talking about. All right, use what you learn to help you think about the passages as you read. So we want kids to be readers. I understand that. And we want them to be able to read a text and be able to understand what it says, and then hopefully start either interpreting it or start trying to understand how the choices in that text were made, depending on if you're teaching literature or language. Yes. However, because of the testing situation, students are being asked to approach a text and read a text unlike anything natural. I don't really pick up texts cold and just start reading them. I look at the back of the cover, or I am reading something on the internet, and the algorithm knows me better than I know myself, and it recommends something else. And so I click on that because I know something about it, because it's of interest to me, something. The kids don't have that. You all know this. The test is cold reading. And so if they can read those questions ahead of time and get an idea of what the passage is talking about, they're going to be so much more prepared to read that passage. I used to say, when I first started, I said, okay, we're going to read the passage and we're going to mark what's important. And then I realized, wait, we don't know what's important until we've read the questions. Now, that's not the way we would necessarily teach something if we weren't doing the multiple choice questions. I get it. Okay. But it is a strategy that I encourage people to use and encourage kids to try. Even if you're doing ACT and SAT, same thing. All right, we could talk about that if you want. I do say make notes on the passage as you encounter things, and you can still do that on the digital exam. If you've not played around with the Blue Book app yet, it is a free app you can get on College Board's website, and you get one free practice test in there for students to know what it's like to take the test. That practice test does not work with AP Classroom, because it's a practice test. You're not supposed to give a grade for it or anything like that. It's just there so that you and students can get used to what the Blue Book looks like. There's lots of videos about using Blue Book and things on College Board's YouTube channel, and I encourage you to check that out. And then we'll see here in a little bit, but I like using these old school KWL charts to teach kids how to think through these things, because we want kids to get used to thinking about the questions, thinking about the passage as they read it, and then being able to go and answer the questions pretty quickly. For the composition questions, okay, it's similar. The questions have a reason provided, so we'll look at that in a moment. But for the composition questions, and this matters for AP Literature people too, because you're still teaching composition in the literature course. Right? We don't ask students to make a change or a revision to their writing without a reason. And the same thing for the composition questions. Okay, most of you know that, some of you don't. I just saw in a message here that somebody said I hadn't noticed that. Well, that's absolutely right, and we'll see how that plays out in just a moment. These questions can take a little bit longer. I know a lot of people know that already. Students need to pay close attention to the purpose and the argument of the passage. The reason is because some of the answers might be correct if you assume something different about the purpose or the argument of the passage. So students need to pay close attention to what the passage is arguing. What is the purpose of it? All right, and then I really want you to know this. This is really important. AP and ETS, they work really hard to make sure that if there's a revision that they're asking about in in sentence 7, that whatever that revision would be wouldn't then affect a question about sentence 8 or 9 or so on. They really don't want those questions to affect other questions. All right, and that's a really important thing, because a lot of students, in talking with students about these things, have shown a lot of anxiety about that. Well, I'm worried that if this is right, then it changes this question. They try their best not to let that happen. All right. And then we've already, a lot of you have already showed these, and what we know, but the correct answers are called keys, incorrect ones are called distractors. There's often an obviously wrong one we can eliminate, and there's often a main distractor or a key distractor, or the one that seems right, but it's not for whatever reason. All right, the biggest keys to the multiple choice questions. All right. In Lit, comprehension matters more than interpretation. Interpretation is very difficult to ask questions about because so many people interpret things in different ways. That's what the essays are for. So students really need to focus on comprehending and understanding what the passage is about. Not necessarily saying, well, I know what this says, but what I think it means is this. That may matter in 1 or 2 questions, but really the most important thing is comprehending what it's talking about. And then students need to make sure that there's evidence to support the answer. Sometimes the answer looks good or sounds good, but then when you ask a student to go and find something, put their finger on something in the passage that would help support it, they have trouble doing that. And so that probably means that answer is not correct. For Lang, a couple big things here. Focus on the elements of the rhetorical situation, specifically purpose, audience, and exigence. Those are really the things that you're going to see questions about. It's really hard to ask questions about the broader context of a passage. And so you're really not going to see questions about that. But you will see questions about purpose. You will see questions about audience. It's all audience. Every rhetorical choice is about audience and how that choice helps further the purpose with that audience. But you will also see questions about exigence. And remind students, they need reminding of this, ignore their opinion on the argument or the message. That starts to sneak in and taint the way that they feel about the purpose or about the choices of the passage, and it can cause them to select the wrong answer. So they really have to try to ignore that. It's not that big of a deal, but it does matter. And then finally, for both courses, read the entire sentence. Oh my gosh, how many times I've asked students, okay, I want you to answer this question, and they go and answer it, and I can tell the difference between the ones who read the entire sentence that it referred to. So it said in line 22, and they went to line 22 and they just read line 22, even though the sentence started 2 lines above it and ended 2 lines below it. And to get the thought, the complete thought that includes line 22, they have to read the entire sentence. And so make sure that they're doing that. This is a key in both courses, but especially with poetry in the literature course, because students really just want to see line by line and they're not thinking about the way the punctuation affects the poem. Right? It does significantly. All right. And then always think about how the parts relate to the whole. So the little small individual things that they're reading about, that they're answering smaller questions about, those things will help them think about the bigger questions at the end, in the passage as a whole questions. Those things, those smaller questions will help them with that. And just practice with this. What do we know about this passage based on this question? Or we've looked at these 2 or 3 things. How does that help us think about the passage as a whole? Those things will matter. And let them see you thinking through that. They need permission to think through this stuff, because they think you as the English teacher get them all right every single time. But if they see you struggling, they're like, oh, okay, good. I don't feel so bad. And it helps with their confidence. Give them permission to struggle. Give them permission to make mistakes. And you'll do that by showing them that